I proposed the arrangement on a Thursday. It was practical. That was how I framed it to myself then, and that was how I presented it to her, and that was the word she used when she agreed. Practical. We were both using it as a shield, and we both knew it, and neither of us said so. Her name was Iris Vane. She was the daughter of my father's oldest friend, a man who had died the previous spring and left behind a modest house, a respected name, and very little else. Iris had been managing on her own for 8 months by the time I came to her with my proposal. She had sold what could be sold. She had let the extra rooms. She had taken in mending and alterations and done it without telling anyone who didn't need to know, which told me more about her character than anything I could have asked directly. She was 26. She had no other prospects, or none that had materialized. I knew this from my father's correspondence, from the quiet network of information that moves through county families like water through stone, slow, invisible, everywhere. People had noticed that she was capable. Fewer had done anything about it. The world has always been better at noticing capable women than rewarding them. I had noticed her before I came with the proposal. I want to be honest about that. I had noticed her at the funeral the previous spring, standing very straight at the graveside in a coat that was good, but not new. And I had noticed her at the reading of the will 2 weeks later, sitting very still while the solicitor explained that the house was hers in name but mortgaged in practice. She had not flinched. She had asked 3 clear, precise questions, taken the documents, and thanked the solicitor as though he had delivered good news. I had thought about her after that, not constantly, not in the way that announces itself, in the way that a problem returns to you when you are not looking at it directly, at odd moments, in the margins of other thinking. In October, when the question of the trust came to a head, I sat at my desk for a long evening and thought about it honestly and arrived at the same name I had been arriving at, obliquely, for months. I needed a wife for reasons that were, in their own way, equally practical. My grandmother's estate, Harrow Hill, 400 acres in the north, was held in trust until my 35th year or my marriage, whichever came first. I was 33. The trust was administered by my uncle, a man named Gerald, who managed the estate capably and who I liked well enough, but who I had no intention of waiting 2 more years for. The estate needed decisions made now. Drainage work on the lower fields that had been flooding every autumn and ruining the grazing. New tenancy agreements on the east farms where 3 families were working land under terms set 30 years ago that benefited no one. A roof on the granary that had been discussed for 3 years and assessed twice and never acted on because Gerald was cautious and caution had its limits when rain was getting into the grain store. I didn't want a real marriage. I wanted the estate. That was honest, at least. I told Iris exactly that. I sat across from her in her small front parlor with its carefully arranged furniture and its one good lamp, and I told her what I needed and what I was offering and what I was not offering, and I watched her listen with the particular stillness of someone who was doing fast arithmetic behind a neutral face. What I was offering, my name, a room of her own at Harrow Hill, a household allowance sufficient to maintain her without dependence, and the settling of the mortgage on her father's house so that it could be sold cleanly and the proceeds kept by her. What I was not offering, any expectation beyond the performance of a functioning marriage in social contexts where it would be observed. She asked 3 questions. Would she be expected to leave her house immediately? Yes. The arrangement required cohabitation to satisfy the trust. Would she have her own rooms at Harrow Hill? Yes. Her own bedroom and sitting room, her privacy guaranteed. Would the arrangement be reviewed at the end of a year if either party found it untenable? Yes. Then she said practical, and we shook hands, and that was that. I drove home through the October dark, thinking that I'd done a sensible thing cleanly and honestly, and that it would work because we were both sensible people who had agreed to the same terms and understood what they were signing. I did not think about the way she had looked at me when I named the terms, the slight pause before the first question. I did not think about what the pause might have meant. We married quietly in November in a registrar's office, 2 witnesses, no guests. She wore a gray dress that she had clearly made or altered herself. The fit was too exact for off the shelf, the fabric good but reworked. I noticed the stitching at the cuffs, even precise, better than most professional work. I didn't mention it. It felt like the kind of thing you notice and do not say on a day that was supposed to be businesslike. She didn't mention the rings I had bought, which were good ones. I'd spent more than was strictly necessary because I had decided that if I was going to do this, I was going to do it properly, and I didn't want her embarrassed in front of anyone who looked at her hands. She put hers on and looked at it for a moment, really looked, the way you look at something unexpected, and then looked up at me, and I looked away first. We drove north in my car, 4 hours. She sat with a book in her lap and looked out the window more than she read. I drove and didn't try to fill the silence, and she didn't either, and it was, I thought, not a bad beginning for a practical arrangement. Harrow Hill was larger than she'd been expecting. I could tell from the way she went still when we came up the drive, not overwhelmed. She was not someone who overwhelmed easily, just recalibrating, taking in the scale of the thing, the long approach through the avenue of beeches gone bare in November, the house at the end of it, with its stone front and its many windows catching the last of the afternoon light. I watched her take it in and said nothing. I showed her the house myself, not the full tour, there were staff for that, but the rooms that mattered. Her bedroom, which I had prepared properly with a fire laid and fresh linen and a writing desk by the window because I had guessed she would want one. Her sitting room adjoining with a good reading chair and a lamp placed where it would be useful. The kitchen entrance and the back stairs, which she asked about specifically. A practical question. The question of someone thinking about how they would move through the house on ordinary days, not special occasions. The library she stopped in the doorway of and looked at for a long moment before she walked in. It was a good library. My grandfather had built it seriously, and my father had added to it, and I had continued the habit. Floor to ceiling on 3 walls, a rolling ladder, deep armchairs by the fire. She walked in slowly, the way you walk into water when you're not sure of the depth, and ran her finger along a shelf. Old habit. The kind of thing someone does when they've been around books their whole life and can't help it. "You've read these?" she asked. "Most of them," I said. She looked at me, a different look than the ones before, something adjusting. "All right," she said, quietly, like something had settled. We had dinner together that first night at the long table in the dining room, which was built for 12 and felt absurd for 2. We sat at opposite ends of it and spoke in the careful way of people who have agreed to something and are now working out what it means in practice. The food was good. Mrs. Pemberton had taken the new mistress's arrival seriously, and I was about to suggest we move to the smaller room when she said, without looking up from her soup, "This table is ridiculous for 2 people. We should eat in the morning room." So we did, from then on. The morning room had a round table and a window that looked east over the kitchen garden. It fit 4 comfortably and 2 easily, and it was warm from the adjacent kitchen, and it smelled of the bread Mrs. Pemberton baked on Tuesdays and Fridays. Iris seemed to relax slightly in it. Her shoulders came down half an inch. She asked Mrs. Pemberton about the kitchen garden. Mrs. Pemberton told her. Something began. She was good at the house. Better than I expected, which was already saying something because I had expected her to be competent. Within a week, she understood the staff better than I had in years of visits. She knew which ones were reliable and which needed managing and which were coasting on long service and a long-standing tolerance for things done adequately rather than well. She didn't interfere dramatically. She simply started being present in the right places at the right times and asking the right questions in the right tone, and things quietly improved. The linens were done properly for the first time in a season. The back corridor that had smelled of damp since the autumn got the window resealed without anyone having to be told twice. The tenant from the South Farm, who had been overdue on his rent for 3 months, paid it in full the week after Iris had a conversation with him at the gate that I was not present for and that I did not ask about. Mr. Pemberton, the housekeeper, who had been at Harrow Hill for 20 years and regarded new mistresses with professional suspicion refined over long experience, thawed within a fortnight. I knew this because she stopped bringing concerns to me and started bringing them to Iris, which was the highest form of endorsement she was capable of. I watched all of this and said little. We had developed, in those first weeks, an equilibrium that I found easier than I had expected. Dinner in the morning room. Separate evenings mostly. She read, I worked, but occasionally the same room, by the quiet drift of two people with compatible habits. The library most often. Both of us occupied, the fire between us, the house settling into night around us. She had a way of being present that did not demand acknowledgement. I had never lived with anyone who had that quality. I hadn't known it was possible to share a room with someone and feel more settled than alone. Mornings, she was up before me. I discovered this when I came down early one day. I had slept badly and given up on it before 6. To find her already at the kitchen table with the housekeeper going over the week's accounts, they both looked up when I came in. Mrs. Pemberton with mild surprise, Iris with the composed attention she brought to most things. I didn't know you were an early riser, she said. I'm not usually, I said. She looked at me steadily. Her expression was the same one she'd used in the parlor when I'd proposed, fast arithmetic behind neutral features. I'll tell Mrs. Pemberton to set breakfast earlier, she said. You don't have to change your schedule, I said. I'm not, she said. I was suggesting we overlap. I looked at her. All right, I said. So breakfast became ours as well. It was at breakfast that I learned most of what I came to know about her. Not from questions. She deflected personal questions with the ease of someone who had been doing it for years, but from the way she talked when she was interested in something. She talked differently about things that mattered to her, more directly, less managed. The gap between what she was thinking and what she said narrowed until sometimes there was no gap at all. She had opinions about the farming calendar that were sharper than most of my tenants, and she had arrived at them by reading, which she had done extensively and systematically in the way of someone who had educated themselves because no one had done it for them. Her father had not been a man who thought women needed the kind of education that came with opinions. Iris had formed her opinions anyway, quietly, from books, and they were the better for having been formed under pressure. She had opinions about the drainage situation on the lower fields that were, I realized by January, correct. I told her so. She looked at me across the breakfast table. I know, she said, but she said it without smugness, just fact. The way you state something that has been true for a while and is now simply being acknowledged. I started asking her about the estate decisions. At first, as a courtesy, she was here. She was clearly thinking about the land. It seemed reasonable to include her. But she kept being right, or at least asking the questions that led me to the right answer, and I am not the kind of man who ignores useful information because of where it comes from. That kind of pride has no place in running land. By February, she was sitting in on the estate meetings with Harrow's land agent, a careful, precise man named Davies who had managed the estate for 12 years and who regarded the new arrangement with his own brand of professional assessment. By March, she was running them. I watched Davies realize what he was dealing with over the course of about 2 meetings. The slight recalibration, the shift from polite inclusion to genuine attention. He started sending reports addressed to both of us. It was the most efficient form of respect. My Uncle Gerald came in February. He came to inspect the arrangement, which he did not say, but which was obvious. He was not a malicious man. He was a careful one. He had administered the trust for 11 years, and he took that responsibility seriously. He had known me since I was 7. He knew the shape of my decisions. This one had been abrupt, and he wanted to understand it. He spent 2 days at Harrow Hill. He watched Iris at dinner, which she handled with the composed ease of someone who knew exactly what was being assessed and had decided not to perform for it. She was herself, direct when directness was appropriate, dry when something amused her, attentive when Gerald talked about the estate history, which she had clearly been reading because she asked questions that assumed familiarity. Gerald softened visibly under this because Gerald, like most men who love a place, wanted other people to love it too. The second evening after dinner, he pulled me aside in the hall. "She's good for this house," he said. "I know," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "And for you?" he said. I didn't answer that. He nodded, the way men nod when the answer they get is more informative than the one they asked for, and let it go. The trust released in March. The documents were signed, clean. I told Iris at breakfast the following morning, set the letter beside her plate without comment. She read it, looked up. "Good," she said. "The granary roof and the East Farm tenancy. Davies has been waiting 3 weeks for the new agreements." "I know," I said. "I'll see him Thursday." She went back to her tea. I looked at her. This was the thing about Iris. She had never, in 4 months, once referred to the arrangement. Not obliquely, not in a way that reminded either of us what this was and wasn't. I had expected it to be present between us the way a piece of furniture is present in a room. Always there, always slightly in the way. It wasn't. I didn't know if this was because she had put it away deliberately or because somewhere along the way it had stopped being accurate. I hadn't put it away. I was aware of it every morning across the breakfast table. I was aware of it when she sat in the estate meetings with her notepad and her careful attention. I was aware of it in the evenings in the library when she was reading and I was working, and the room was quiet in a way that felt like its own kind of conversation. The particular quiet of 2 people who were comfortable enough with each other to stop filling silence. I had not expected to find her necessary. That was the honest word for it. Not useful, not convenient. Necessary. She had become necessary to the house, to the estate, to the mornings, to the evenings, to the particular quality of a day that had her in it versus a day that didn't. I was aware that none of those things were what the arrangement had specified. April came mild and wet. The drainage work began on the lower fields. Iris had taken to walking the estate in the afternoons, the mud and Wellingtons kind of walking that some people find beneath them, and she found simply reasonable. I had started joining her, not decided, just accumulated, the way water finds its level without being told. We walked the east boundary one afternoon in the rain, not hard rain, the thin, persistent kind that wets you slowly and completely. She had a green coat and sensible boots, and she didn't complain about the rain, which I had learned was her standard mode of operation regarding things that couldn't be changed. She was quiet for a while, walking and looking at the field drainage, the way the new channels were moving water down toward the lower boundary. The angle had been disputed. Davies had wanted one approach. She had suggested another based on something she'd read about a similar scheme in the east of the county. We had gone with hers. "You were right about the angle," she said. "Davies was right," I said. "Davies agreed with me," she said. "There's a difference." I looked at her. She was watching the water run, almost satisfied, not quite, something quieter than satisfaction. I want to ask you something, I said. She glanced at me, alert but not alarmed. The year, I said. We said we'd review it at the end of a year. She was still. It's April, I said. 8 months. I know what month it is, she said. I'm asking early, I said, because I'd like to know where you are before we get to the end of the year and it becomes a formal thing with formal answers. I want to know before it becomes formal. The rain came down steadily. A crow called somewhere in the trees along the boundary hedge. She turned to look at me. Her face was the way it sometimes was when she had been thinking about something for a long time and was deciding how much of the thinking to show. "Where are you?" she asked quietly. I looked at her, at the rain on her coat and the muddy field behind her and her eyes that did fast arithmetic and arrived at honest answers. I don't want to review it, I said. I want to stop calling it an arrangement. I want to call it a marriage, the real kind. And I want to know if that is something you want or something you would simply accept, because I am not interested in your tolerance. I am interested in whether you want this, whether you want me. The rain. The crow again, further along the hedge now. She looked at me for a long moment. I stopped pretending a long time ago, she said. Her voice was very quiet. I don't know exactly when. Somewhere between the drainage arguments and the breakfast table, and you asking my opinion about things you didn't have to ask my opinion about. She paused. I stopped pretending, and I didn't say anything because I didn't know what you were doing. I didn't know if you were being kind or practical or something else entirely. I was doing the same thing, I said. She looked at me. You could have said so, she said. So could you, I said. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. The thing that came before a smile in a person who had learned to be careful with them. Practical, she said. That word again, I said. Seems to work for us, she said. I looked at her standing in the April rain on the edge of our east field with her green coat and her careful eyes and the 8 months of breakfasts and estate meetings and quiet evenings between us. I took her hand. She let me. We stood there for a while on the boundary of Harrow Hill while the rain came down and the fields ran clear, and neither of us said anything more because there was nothing left that needed saying in that moment. The summer was a good one, not just for the harvest, though it was a good harvest, the best the lower fields had produced in a decade. Good in the way that things are good when they have found their right shape. When the arrangement between their parts has stopped being imposed and started being natural. She was in the estate meetings and at the breakfast table and in the library in the evenings and occasionally in the fields in her green coat, and it wasn't an arrangement anymore, hadn't been for a long time, and we both knew it, and we had stopped needing to say so. I watched her that summer with the particular attention of someone who's been given permission to look. She was different when she was not being careful, not unguarded. She was never entirely unguarded, but lighter. She laughed more, the real kind. She argued with Davies about the East Farm agreements with a directness she had modulated before and didn't modulate now, and Davies found it more efficient and said so. She started wearing the green coat into the village without worrying about the mud on it. My uncle came back in August for a week. He watched us at dinner the same way he had in February. The same careful attention. The difference was that in February he had been looking for evidence of a real marriage and finding something he hadn't decided about yet. In August, he was watching something he recognized. I could see the moment he stopped assessing and started simply being present at a dinner table with two people who had found their way to each other. On the last evening, he said, quietly, to no one in particular, Harrow Hill suits you both. Iris looked at me. I looked at her. Yes, we said, at the same time. not planned. Gerald smiled into his glass. The granary roof was finished by October. Solid work, properly done, 3 years overdue. The East Farm tenancy agreements were signed. Better terms for the families, better clarity for the estate, a small rent increase structured over 3 years rather than demanded at once. Davies had presented them. Iris had drafted the structure. I had signed them. All three of us knew whose idea they were. The lower fields drained cleanly through the autumn rains for the first time in a decade. I walked the east boundary alone one morning and watched the channels doing their work and thought about a Thursday in a small parlor with a good lamp and a woman doing arithmetic behind a neutral face, and how little I had understood then about what I was actually proposing. I found her in the kitchen garden one afternoon in November, standing at the wall where the last roses were holding on past their season. She had her hands in her coat pockets, and she was looking at them with the expression I knew by now as her thinking face, the one that meant she'd arrived somewhere and was deciding how to say it. I stood beside her. She didn't look at me. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About the fact that I came here with 3 boxes and a gray dress and a handshake," she said, "and I thought I was making a sensible decision under difficult circumstances." She paused. "I was making a decision about survival, about the mortgage and the house and having somewhere to be that wasn't precarious. I was very tired of precarious." I looked at the roses, the last of them, holding their color in the gray November light. "And now?" I said. She looked at the garden, at the wall and the beds and the gate with the old stone above it worn smooth by weather. "Now I didn't know I was arriving somewhere," she said. "I thought I was making a safe decision. I didn't know it was going to be." She paused. "This. What is this?" I asked. "In your words." She was quiet for a moment. "Home," she said. "Finally. Not given or inherited or fallen into. Chosen." She paused. "By both of us, starting from a handshake in a parlor which was about survival and arriving here, which is about something else entirely." I held her gaze. "Yes," I said. "It is." She took her hand out of her pocket and put it in mine. Her hand was cold from the November air, and I wrapped both of mine around it, and we stood there at the kitchen garden wall while the last roses held their color, and the grounds ran down to the lower fields where the drainage channels moved the water cleanly. The East Farms had their fair agreements. The granary had its roof. The house behind us was warm and running well and fully, genuinely, completely ours. Not because a trust had released and documents had been signed, but because 2 people had arrived at it separately and found the same thing when they got there. Neither of us said anything more. We didn't need to. Some things stop needing words once they've been understood properly. Once the arithmetic is finished and the answer is in front of you, and it is, beyond any practical doubt, exactly right. This was one of them. I had proposed an arrangement on a Thursday. I had not known then what I was proposing. By November, in the kitchen garden, with the last roses and her cold hand in both of mine, I understood it completely. I had been proposing this all along. I had simply not had the language for it yet. There's a particular quality to the first winter of a real thing. Not an arrangement, not a practical decision made under difficult circumstances. A real thing, chosen by 2 people who understood what they were choosing and chose it anyway. The winter at Harrow Hill that year was a good one for knowing what you had. The cold came properly in December, and the grounds went hard, and the fires had to be laid earlier and kept later, and the morning room was warm, with the kitchen behind it, and the round table between us and the kitchen garden outside the east window under frost. We had the estate meetings, and breakfast table, and the evenings in the library, and all of it was the same as the autumn, and all of it was different in the way that things are different when the pretending has stopped. She stopped being careful about what she said in the mornings. Not careless. She was never careless with words. She valued them too much for that. But she stopped managing the gap between what she was thinking and what she said, and what came through was sharper and drier and more precisely herself than anything the arrangement had permitted. I told her on a January morning over the accounts that the East Farm drainage was going to need another pass in the spring. She looked at the figures. I told you that in September, she said. I know, I said. She looked at me. You are a slow reader, she said. I looked at her. Of drainage reports, she said. Clearly. I kept my face neutral. Clearly, I said. She went back to the accounts, but she was almost smiling, and I knew what that looked like by then, and I kept my face neutral about that too, and the morning room was warm with the kitchen behind it, and the frost outside the window, and the round table between us and Harrow Hills settling into its winter around us both. Davies came in February for the quarterly review. He spread the figures on the morning room table and went through them with us in the way he had developed over the year of addressing us both at once, naturally. Without the transition, you could still see occasionally in people who had known the estate before Iris and were still adjusting to after. The lower fields were the best they had been in 12 years. The drainage had done what it was supposed to do, and the grazing had recovered, and the numbers showed it clearly. Davies showed them without comment, and the comment was built into the showing. Iris looked at the figures for the lower fields. She said nothing. But she looked at me briefly across the table with the particular look that was not smugness and not pride, but the quiet satisfaction of someone who had done correct arithmetic and is watching it prove out. The look I had learned to read and which told me more than most words. Davies saw the look. He was a perceptive man. He kept his own counsel about it and went back to the figures, and the morning room was warm and the winter was outside it, and the three of us sat around the table at Harrow Hill doing the work of a well-running estate. The spring came in April as it had the previous year, mild and wet. The drainage work on the lower fields was finished and holding. The granary had its roof. The East Farms had their agreements. The house was running at the level it had reached in the first weeks of Iris being in it, and had maintained without effort because the person who had set it running that way was still there. Not as an arrangement. Just there. Gerald came in May, the last visit he made, in the role of trust administrator because the trust was finished, and there was no longer anything to administer. He came, he said, because he wanted to see the East Farm drainage. He came because he wanted to see us. We had dinner. The three of us at the round table in the morning room because the dining room remained absurd for anything under 6 people. Gerald looked at the house and the gardens and at us across the table, and he had the expression of a man who has been watching something develop and is satisfied with how it came out. I had something to tell you, he said, toward the end of the evening. In November, after the first visit. He looked at his glass. I decided against it. What? I said. He looked at Iris. That it was already real, he said. Whatever you two were telling yourselves, it was. He took a drink. I could see it from across the dinner table. I thought you could probably work it out yourselves, and I was right. Iris looked at her glass. We were slow, she said. You were, he agreed. But you got there. We got there, I said. He smiled. Gerald smiled with his whole face, the way some men do, without reservation. Harrow Hill suits you both, he said. We said yes at the same time, as we had in August, as we would go on doing with things that were simply true and required no deliberation. The summer came properly, and the estate was good, and the house was full of the particular quality of a place that has found its right people and knows it, which expresses itself in small ways. Fires that stay lit, windows that open easily, rooms that are used for what they were built for, and in the kitchen garden wall where the last roses held their color past their season every November, the gate with the Weste initials carved above it, worn smooth by 140 years of weather, stood in the autumn light exactly as it had always stood. She had found those initials, cleaned them, made them visible again. That was how she did everything. She looked, and she found, and she made things visible. I had been slow to understand that I was one of those things, but she had found me too, and here, finally, was what home felt like.